framework that they use is very specific, and it does produce results. And what we did for our programs is we adopted some of the elements of that program, and I'll specify which ones in a little bit. I also was invited down to Atlanta some years ago to attend and participate in a gender and equity and diversity workshop at the CARE organization. For those not familiar with CARE, they are an international organization that advocates for and promotes women's rights around the world. They have field offices in most every country, and they do incredible work around promoting gender equity, especially in places where that's really, really, really important and not happening an awful lot. And so they invited me down. We had an alum who works there, and I took part in an exercise. That there's a lot of the work that we do, but we do ours with students, and theirs are geared specifically toward adults. And so we were able to, again, take elements of that and work alongside with them. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the basis of this, I come to global studies through my work in equity and inclusion. My PhD is in African and African American studies with a focus in philosophy. And so my entire education philosophy revolves around primarily students of color and making sure that our school communities are safe and brave places for all students to participate. And we want to make sure that our communities are safe places without sacrificing standards, right? We want to hold all students to the same high standards. And so I wanted our global studies program to maintain that in a very explicit way, so that all of our students feel like they have some sort of stake in the world and that the world is listening to them, and that when they go out to do internships and get jobs and go to college, that they are equipped with the skills to be fruitful and compassionate citizens. And so, in order for me to do all of that, and then eventually when we're pitching it to faculty and students and then trustees, I had to come up with a framework. And my framework revolved around empathy. And I don't exactly remember the day in which I chose empathy over any other concept, but it just kind of clicked, and it seems to work. And so I picked empathy because it's pretty sexy right now. Everyone's talking about empathy. They are. It's everywhere, right? And we picked up on that a little bit. People are talking about it. They want to talk about it. They want to go to empathy workshops. They want to do empathy training. And part of that was by design. We wanted to use some of the language, the rhetoric that's already out there, and commonplace there. And what makes empathy so important right now, what we're missing, I think, as a society, is this idea that we have lost the ability to talk to one another and to empathize with one another, especially with people with whom we do not agree. Right? I was talking to a class just last block, and one of the students had asked, how does this tie into the fact that, of our current political system? And so that's really always the elephant in the room when we talk about empathy, is how can I be empathetic for the Democrat or the Republican? And I think it's very hard and both very easy at the same time. The theory behind it is very easy. The execution is ridiculously difficult. And what I'm trying to get students to do, what I'm trying to get adults to do, right, when I do these workshops, is to find commonality in language, right? And what we see is that, let's use the political example. Regardless of whether or not you're a Democrat or a Republican, your basic needs are the exact same thing, right? So if, let's say I'm a Democrat, I need to feel affirmed, validated, that people who look like me and who think like me are represented, right? And have a voice, right? And if I'm having a conversation with my Republican counterpart, and we got down to the level of feelings and needs, I bet they're very similar. They need to feel represented. They need to feel safe, right? They need to feel valued. They need to feel a sense of representation, right? That's what we're not seeing now, and that's what I'm trying to get students to get to, right? Let's get down to that deep level of conversation and realize that, wait a second, our language that we're using can actually be very similar. And when we find that bridge, when we find that commonality, we can actually do stuff, right? We can talk across differences. We may not agree with one another, but we can at least understand where we're coming from and work toward a more compassionate outcome. And how can empathy help? What we've done is we have created 2 signature courses that I'll explain in a second, but we've moved empathy into the academic day. We've made empathy an academic pursuit. right? And so at the boarding school, we do a lot of co-curricular programming around character education. And so when we talk about our school's values, gratitude, respect, kindness, honesty, integrity, right? We tend to relegate those conversations to outside the academic day, after 3 o'clock. And what I really pushed for and eventually got permission to do was to move this discussion about a values-based character education and make it part and parcel of an academic curriculum, right? And so there isn't a separation between character education and academic education. There's no difference between learning math skills and learning skills with values and empathy, right? It's now part of the academic day for our kids. And in some way, that's kind of, we're playing mind games with our kids, and I'm okay with that to a small degree, right? Kids learn best when they're at school. Kids learn best when they're being taught by teachers. They learn best when they're around desks with their peers and with textbooks. And we wanted to capitalize on that. We could have made this what we call a residential life program, which we have a lot of those. We get our kids in the dorms and we talk about gratitude and respect. I wanted this to be a little bit more explicit. I wanted this to be a little bit more in their face, right? Go to math, go to English, oh wait, I have dialogues next block. And then go to history, and then go to chemistry, right? And so it's part of that whole learning that they're gonna do, that they can then take into their other classes, they can take to their sports, they can take to arts, right? It becomes a part of the entire experience here, right? As I mentioned down here, right, we want our students to encounter opinions, contrary opinions and ways of thinking, and we want them to approach people with compassion, with empathy, right? We're not learning anything unless we're being confronted with ideas that run contrary to ours. But we're also not learning, and we're not doing a good job of fostering a good society if we're not approaching those contrary ideas in a way that's empathetic and treat people with the same amount of respect that we deserve as well, the same amount of dignity as well. So, I love these little emojis, these little graphics here. I'm not sure why, but they're just kind of fun. What we've done is we've separated empathy. We've tried to break down empathy into its composite parts, right? Because oftentimes what we've done and what I've done in the past is tell kids, okay, be more empathetic, now go. And they don't really understand what that means. So we've tried to break it down a little bit. And one way we've done it, and I do this in my global studies seminar as well, is we break it down between easy and hard empathy, right? And so the difference for me is this. Easy empathy is the empathy that we can offer people and we still feel good about ourselves and we are not uncomfortable offering this empathy. It doesn't affect us at a comfort level, right? And I've given some examples here perhaps for some students. What we're trying to get is students to understand that empathy is an incredibly hard thing that one must practice daily in order for it to be successful, right? And it's going to require that you are deeply uncomfortable at times, right? That you are stepping outside of yourself, you're proverbially putting yourself in someone else's shoes, and then you're staying there in that moment of empathy. You're not just giving empathy and then leaving, right? The students that I was with last block made a great point about that's what sympathy is, right? Sympathy allows us to do that. Empathy is more of a connection. We have to dig in a little bit. And hard empathy forces us to be uncomfortable, especially with people with whom we see quite frequently. It's easy to give empathy for people we don't see often, for people, who, don't have a close impact on our lives. It's much more difficult to be empathetic to somebody who, at least in my example, I live with and I work with on a daily basis. I live in a dorm of 37 girls and with 6 other faculty members. If I'm having a disagreement with them, I can't go anywhere without seeing them. We eat our meals together, we eat 2 or 3 meals together a day. We do dorm duty together, we coach together. I literally cannot escape these people, unless I come to California. And so if we do have these disagreements and empathy is required, we have to stick it out. We have to work that out together in that moment, right? 6 days a week, 9 months a year, right? And that makes it a lot more difficult for me to escape and say, I don't want to deal with this right now, because we don't have that option. Added on top of that is the fact that we have 405 students watching us like hawks, constantly, all day, right? And so if we're not if we're not showing empathy and leading with empathy, right? We have students getting up and going to the dining hall at 6 in the morning, and we see students until midnight So we really don't have time to be off, right? And so we have to make sure we're checking ourselves and we understand that empathy it's a lifestyle. It really is, right? It's a way in which we want to live our lives here. So I wanted to offer a little bit of a case study here. And so both of these are from the Global Studies seminar that I teach to seniors. The first one is an example of easy empathy. And some of you have heard me talk about this already. In my Global Studies class, we read a book called Behind the Beautiful Forevers. It's an amazing book if you've not read it. It's written by an American journalist, Catherine Boo, who won the Pulitzer Prize. She's an incredible writer, very accessible for students. And she spends 3 years in Mumbai, one of Mumbai's largest slums, Anawadi, and chronicles the lives of the squatters who live in that slum. Right? And so, and their goings-ons for a couple of years. And my students are able to talk about ethics, we're able to talk about globalization, we're able to talk about a lot of different factors that go into the lives of the people who live there. But ultimately I asked them, said, do you guys have empathy for the people who live in this slum, right? Take, away the fact that they are living just above the poverty line in India, take away the fact that disease is rampant, but as a human being, you are here in Concord, Massachusetts, they're in Anawadi, Mumbai, do you have empathy for them? And they're like, yeah, obviously, yeah, we're definitely empathetic toward these people. It's not even a question, right? It's an incredibly easy place for them to get to, from not thinking about empathy to being 100% fully invested in empathy for those people. I say, great, awesome, A+ for you guys, all right? Before we read that book, we do an exercise with a school in Denmark, one of Denmark's oldest boarding schools, Herlufsholm, I think that's what it's called. We have a collaboration with them whereby we were focusing this year on immigration. Denmark, for those not familiar, has a very, I want to say, interesting policy toward immigration. They are both incredibly liberal in terms of the people that they are letting into their country, and then they immediately become incredibly concrete about the type of education those immigrants must conform to. And so starting at age 1, specifically with Muslim immigrants, they go through a mandatory Denmarkification education, language, culture, history. And it's incredibly rigorous. Right? And oftentimes these Muslim immigrants live in certain pockets, they call them ghettos, in their cities. And so the immigration policies are very firm, right? So we have our students, both sets of students, read an article about that. Then we have both sets of students read an article about our country's immigration policies, including the policy of separating children from their families. And then we engage in the debate. We're able to ask Danish students anything that's on our mind, and they do likewise with us. And for about 45 minutes, the kids are going back and forth asking really, really difficult questions about politics, about gender, about society, about our dear president, right? And the Danish kids are just gonna go for it. They will ask anything. So do you like Trump or not? And my students get really flustered, right? Because no one asked them that question, right? And then our students are asking the Danish kids, so is this a good or bad program? And the Danish kids get really flustered. And so I bring this up to say that when our kids are asked and solicited for their opinions about the current administration and its policies toward immigration, right? That's an example of hard empathy, because now we gotta live in that situation. Now we can't get away from it, right? In a way that they weren't thinking about it before, now they're thinking about it. Now it's a part of how they're going to live their lives and go out and live in the world, right? Are they gonna act on that? Are they not gonna act on that? But it's a moment where they have to live with it. It's a moment where they have to confront it, both with the Danish students, but also with themselves, right? And so we had to brief that, and it was a really jarring experience for our kids, where they became deeply uncomfortable. And even when we bring it back up, they're deeply uncomfortable still. And I said, that's good, you guys pass. That's the point, right? Empathy requires practice, it requires discomfort, and it requires sticking in something that we otherwise may not have stuck into. All of this is a backdrop to the 2 courses that we teach at Middlesex. We have a freshman offering called Dialogues Across Differences, which is a 6-week course that is a graduation requirement. I still don't know how I made it a graduation requirement. I must have just forgotten, but it was a really hard process, and it required a lot of compromise. And that class, you'll see here on the right, the breakdown of the class. But what we do is we have all new students, new freshmen, new sophomores, and now new juniors. Once a week in the third quarter, they come, we give them a textbook that is theirs to keep. And the course is set up so that each week is a different theme and a different skill. So week 1 is learning the difference between hearing versus listening, and I'm happy to elaborate on any of these afterward. Week 2 is intention versus impact, identifying feelings and separating feelings from needs, tone, body language, and reaction. Week 6 kind of ties a lot of that stuff together, week 5. And then week 6 ties everything together and we do effectively a mini exam, right? How do we put these into practice? And so the kids show up, they get that textbook at the top there. That's one of our students who volunteered for me to put a picture of her on the textbook. So she's kind of famous, right? And it's a textbook that we published. We created it and we published it because we thought the kids need a textbook. They have to show up to class and they need something. They need something to doodle in. They need something to write answers in, right? This makes it a little bit more academically rigorous. And so all freshmen, all new students will take this course. And the compromise is that we cannot assign homework and we cannot give any assessments, right? So they show up, they look in their book. We have very strict lesson plans, and then they leave, right? They leave the books in the classrooms because 9th grade boys are going to lose some books, right? And these books just don't grow on trees. And so they pick up the textbook, they do the class, and then they leave. 40 minutes once a week for 6 weeks, and that's it. We do collect survey data for all of our courses, and we have for years. We're trying to track how successful this is. It's difficult to track empathy. It's what we consider a soft skill. It's tough to quantify it, but we're trying. And we're hoping in the next couple of years we'll have some really good, fairly longitudinal data that we can point to. The second class that we have is, and this is a newer class that we developed, is called Citizenship and Civil Societies. And this is a course that we developed last year out of the need for, we've had many discussions around what does it mean to be a good citizen, right? But that conversation is tricky because we're citizens in various societies, right? We have our local, state, national, global society, right? But we also have this digital society that we're members of, and we really want to pinpoint that as well as a part of the course. And so what we've done is we've tried to define what a citizen is over time, right? And we're speaking mostly of a US context. The good thing about offering this in the 11th grade is that all 11th graders have to take US history. It's a state requirement. And so we know that we have a time when all juniors are going through the same experience, either AP or non-AP US history. And so the first 3 weeks of this course runs parallel to the beginning of US history. So when the students are doing the Declaration of Independence, the Articles of Confederation, the Constitution, they do a reading in this class to talk about that, right? When they're talking about Dred Scott and some of the early cases where they're defining who is a citizen and who is not, they're doing a reading to talk about that, and that was by design. So they get another opportunity outside of US history class to talk about what does it mean to be a citizen. Also incorporated in that class are what is the future of citizenship, right? Are we going to lose territorial claims to citizenship? Are we going to have just one global citizen, cosmopolitan democracy style, right? And what does it mean to be a digital citizen? Do you have rights and responsibilities? Is there an ethics to this as well? And we're tackling all of these things. And this is our first year running the course as a pilot program. We asked for volunteers from the junior class to take this class, and exactly half of the class volunteered for it. So now we have some really good data going into next year. I'm teaching this on Thursday. This will be week 8, so this is an 8-week program, and it's the last week. So it does start I taught the first day of school, this class, and it goes for 8 weeks. And then the kids will finish, we'll collect some data, and then because they volunteered and were awesome, we're throwing them a big party, so it'll be really fun. And again, this will be another course that builds off of the skills that they've learned in dialogues across differences, but makes it a little bit more appropriate for a junior context. It's a little bit more difficult. The readings are kind of tricky, but we wanted them to be tricky. We wanted them to be a little bit more rigorous. Let's let them work a little bit more. But they're doing a really, really good job with all of these. And then lastly, what we really want to do with all of our programming here is, number one, making empathy academic, right? This is transferable to all the work we're doing in the classroom. It's transferable to the art studio, to the theater stage, to all of your sports requirements as well, right? but it is academic. It's an intellectual pursuit. We talk about theory. We have a methods to it, right? We want to make this a part of the intellectual experience of our students. Character development is the intellectual pursuit that our kids need to develop, right? And we want them to embrace the understanding of opposing viewpoints and ways of living as a normative practice, right? This is how we learn, and this is a normal, acceptable way and a mandatory way of how we need to learn about the world and about other people. So yeah, that's what we're doing. And I'm happy to spend as much time with questions as you guys will let me. So thank you. Let's do it.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for being here today and for sharing your wealth of knowledge. I want to take your global studies course, quite frankly. So I'm a curious learner, and I definitely want to learn more. So thank you again. My question seems it's more of a comment and a suggestion.
Awesome, please.
I am curious to know, in fact, based on your presentation, it seems to me that your empathy approach is very similar to our dignity model framework.
Okay.
And the question is, can you share or elaborate a little bit more on the ideas that you have on how to quantify empathy?
It's really hard because a lot of the data that we're collecting is qualitative in nature. And so what we're trying to do is pick out parts of empathy that kids are grasping onto, right? So certain language, certain skills, certain tools. Talking about, if we're talking about empathy as a holistic, abstract, philosophical concept, it's too elusive, it's too nebulous, which is why we've broken it down. And so, for example, when we do our survey data, one of the questions we ask is, what elements of empathy resonated with you? And we're looking for key terms here. We're looking for 1 or 2 word answers here. And then we can compile that and come up with aggregate data, right? And then say, well, one of the things that they love is, the idea of critical listening or active listening to somebody, right? That's a component of empathy here, right? Another component of empathy that our kids have come up with that they really enjoyed was, weirdly enough, and simply enough, is eye contact. Like they really grasped onto that, right? You can show empathy to somebody by maintaining eye contact with them, or not maintaining eye contact. Given the cultural background of some people, eye contact is incredibly taboo, right? But they picked up on that very quickly here. And so what we're seeing is after maybe 3, almost 4 years of collecting data, they're coming up with the parts of empathy that then we can say are under the umbrella of empathy. And there are any number of those skills that fall under the umbrella of empathy, or even dignity, right? But because we framed it as empathy being the umbrella concept, the parts that we get from that, we consider to go toward our understanding of promoting empathy, if that makes sense. It's a great question. It's really hard to do. Yes?
What are some of the topics that you find students want to delve into?
Politics. Immediately.
Yeah, politics. Yeah, the kind of top 2, 3 topics,
Yeah.
That you would say that, they know it's going to be uncomfortable, but they're hungry to discuss.
So there are 5 of us teachers who teach this class, and we develop lesson plans at the beginning of each year, and they're the same. We want it to be pretty uniform. But the agreement is, don't ever stop a conversation. We're not going to introduce a conversation, they're going to introduce it, and we're going to go with it. And universally, they want to talk about politics, they want to talk about immigration, and one thing that surprised us is they want to talk about what's going on in the world at that moment, right? So our kids are very attuned to global events in a way that surprises me. They knew about Saudi Arabia, US tension that's going on right now days before I did, right? And I try to watch the news as often as I can. But politics is by far and away the one thing they want to talk about. They also want to talk about gender an awful lot. And this has been something we've seen in the past couple of years. Our students are very vocal about gender. It's something that we as a school talk about quite frequently. And they're less comfortable talking about it than they are with politics, but they're trying to talk about it. They're finding language and they're trying to figure it out. And so we do talk a lot about that. And race. We talk a lot about race. And part of it is two of the 5 teachers, 2 of us are people of color. And I think they feel more comfortable talking about race in our classes than with the other 3 teachers. But a lot of our conversations, especially in the dialogues course, revolve around race. But also each week has a role play exercise to it. So breaking down the component parts of the class, each week has skills that they're going to learn. We write this out, consideration, so like entry questions, and then a reading or a video. We're moving more toward videos than readings because the kids, they asked us to, so I said, all right. And then we have questions, and then we have role playing and takeaways. 2 of the 6 role playings revolve around race, 1 revolves around gender, 1 revolves around sexuality, and 1 revolves around, this is the week we talk about xenophobia. And so we do talk about race an awful lot, and it's something that our school community is grappling with a lot. And so we wanted to throw it out there, let's talk about it. And then the conversation goes in any number of directions, and the kids do a good job with that. Some better than others, but in general, it's a good, safe, brave space for kids to talk about that stuff. Yes, hi.
You talked a lot about what you're doing to position your students to be able to work through this stuff. You know, you've got specific people teaching that course, but I assume that as you build capacity in your students, this should be leaking out into
Yes.
everything they do. And so I wonder what you're doing to support your faculty who probably vary in their comfort level with doing some of this.
Yeah. So I had mentioned sheepishly earlier that I gave a professional development day around this, and that was a few years ago. It was the most terrifying experience ever to present to your colleagues. But I introduced the idea of this class then, and then last year in the first semester, and then this year in the second semester, I offer this course to faculty. It's not mandatory, but we do ask that as many people take it as possible. So last year we have a faculty of 90 faculty, full-time, part-time, teaching, non-teaching. 25 took it last year, which was pretty good for the first year, including the assistant head and the head of school. That gives some weight to it. And I'm hoping when I offer this in the spring that we'll get more faculty. Programs like this tend to be self-serving in a way, right? I'm not the only faculty person offering a program to other faculty, but it's predominantly women. We had 1 male faculty person take it, and we had 0 white men take this course. And I don't know if that'll change in the future. I'm hoping it will. I have to work on my marketing skills, or just go for bribery. I'm not above bribery. I'm really not. And it's funny, we bribe students all the time. We faculty are pretty easily bribed too. So anytime there's pizza, there tend to be more faculty there. But I do think that one of my jobs as Global Studies Director is to find and help faculty locate professional development opportunities that help them go in this direction. And so we have 2 faculty traveling, 1 to Rwanda, 1 to Senegal, and then when they come back, they have to fill out a report that talks about the various skills and values of our program and how are they going to bring those values explicitly into their teaching. And so it's a slow process. I think it's a lot slower for faculty than it is for students. The students pick up on it like this, and a lot of them are like, yeah, this is a no-brainer. And one of the things you saw with the data from our students was they were able to pick up on exactly what we wanted them to learn really fast, and a lot of our kids just gave us the answer we wanted. And I thought to myself, that's not a terrible thing. They know the answer, right? And they're able to regurgitate that back to me, which means that it's in there somewhere, and it's a start. The faculty have been a little bit slower to process this and to get on board, but I'm optimistic.
You probably mentioned this earlier, so I apologize. Is this a required course for students?
It is. It's a graduation requirement. You cannot go, if you come in, the only way you can get out of this is if you come in as a new junior, because we haven't scheduled the sections for new juniors yet. It's terrible. But if you come in as a freshman or a sophomore, you're going to take both these courses before you graduate, and there's no way to get out.
What is the feedback that you're receiving from the parents about the kids taking these courses?
Super supportive. Every year we have an opening of school parents association meeting. A lot of parents show up, and for the past 3 years I've gone up and I've said, here's how the course is running, and it's been incredibly positive. If I can find a way to staff up later on, I'm hoping to offer a parent section of both of these courses. I'm one dude. It's been really hard to find the time to do it. But they've been incredibly supportive. And I think a part of that is when we started this course is we were very clear about, let me back up. Global studies, globalization has a very left-leaning, tends to have a very left-leaning perspective politically, and people know this. And so when we developed these courses, we want to be value-centric, but also politically neutral. And so I told parents that we're not espousing one political ideology over another, but we're also not going to stop a conversation that occurs that the students bring up about politics, because this is one of the reasons why we're teaching this course. And they've been incredibly supportive, and the board has been very supportive. So none of this would exist if I didn't get the support of that. But we had to compromise a lot. We had to do a lot of compromising. The faculty were very resistant to adding another section to kids' plates, and I'm completely on board with that. But I don't know if they got tired of arguing with me or if I'm that good, but somehow it worked. And I was telling the last block, the students are none the wiser. So in the first quarter of their freshman year, they take a mindfulness course that's required. They take a health and wellness course for a couple of weeks. And then during that one block a week, it used to be that for the third quarter and the fourth quarter, they had it free. They were free to go do whatever they want. I came in the third quarter during that block, and they never knew. And so then when the course is over, I can say, surprise, for being so awesome, now you guys have a free block for the fourth quarter. And what they don't know is that they used to have it in the third quarter too. So if we can keep that a secret, I would appreciate that. Blow my cover there. But we have had pretty good universal support from the school community, which has been really nice.
I know there's no way to quantify this, but can you see a difference in the students? Are the students' behavior, are they more empathetic towards one another? Are they exhibiting these types of things after taking this course? And I know it's really difficult to try to answer that, but is it making an impact outside the course? I'm sure.
I think in small ways it is. So one thing we haven't done yet, the students that took this course for the first time are now juniors, and they're taking citizenship for the first time.
Okay.
What we're going to do about probably this time next year when they're seniors is give them another survey. After 3 years of being at this community, having taken these 2 courses, do you find yourself blah, 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 blah. So we are going to track that a little bit. When we designed the course, I worked with a committee of a number of faculty, and we came up with the idea that these courses are supposed to position kids to do a lot of this work after Middlesex. And if Middlesex benefits from this, that's a plus, but it's not the goal. The goal is for them to kind of get on the train and start the wheels, right? So that when they graduate, they go to internships, they go to jobs, they can continue this work outside of Middlesex. And if we get a little bit of, more empathy on campus, all the better. But one thing I have seen, more anecdotal than anything, is kids when they are in these situations, they pause more. They stop instead of just, verbal whatever, right? And the other thing we're seeing more of that is very welcome change, is they're becoming less, what's the word I'm looking for here? Spontaneous. They're becoming less erratic online with what they're posting online, right? So we've kind of beaten this into their heads a little bit, that what they say online is there forever, right? And in terms of being an empathetic citizen, digital citizen, you have an ethical responsibility to maintain, comport yourself with a certain amount of respect, right? You represent yourself, your family, your community, your school, and I think in general we're seeing kids a little bit more respectful in their digital presence. I have had conversations with students about that, so that's been really good. But in terms of quantifying it, it's been hard. A couple of years, I'm hoping we can have some data that we can look at there. Yes.
At the beginning, you mentioned bringing the world to your classroom versus going out, and you had mentioned, I'm assuming either like the Skype or Google Hangout with the classroom in Denmark and watching videos. Are there other ways you can bring authentic experiences into your classroom without traveling?
Yeah, so because we're a boarding school, we have our kids all day, and we have a small day student population, but when we have programming outside the academic day, they have to stay on campus. We bring in a lot of speakers. And I help facilitate, not every speaker, but many of the speakers that come to campus. And many of them have some sort of global perspective that they're sharing. The problem with bringing in outside speakers is that there's not a good time ever to do it. If you do it during the academic day, they take too long, and then they bleed into classes, and kids grow, no matter what. If you bring them in at the end of the academic day, around 3 o'clock, the kids are tired and they want to go play sports. Many of our speakers come at 7, from 7 to 8, and that's a terrible time for students, because now we're asking them to rush out of sports. You have to eat dinner really fast. You have to shower, please shower, right? And oftentimes for our speakers, we ask them to dress up in formal dress. And that's it's a lot to ask kids to do. And so we're not getting them at their best, but we'd rather that than not get them with these speakers at all. And we bring in some really good speakers. We're fortunate enough to have a number of endowed speaker funds that allow us to bring in some pretty good speakers. And so this year, Cornell West is coming in. And he was our second choice. Brian Stevenson was our first choice. And he still might come, which is awesome. And we've had some excellent speakers come in, and although it's a tough sell for students, they know it's important, but sometimes at 7:45 they can't keep their eyes open, and that's not really on them. They're trying really hard, but that's the other way. We have tried to be more attentive to bringing in more global perspective with our speaker series, and we're doing a pretty good job of that. So that's been another good way we're focusing our attention there. And also, when I wrote up my big report when we began the Global Studies program, I asked each department, academic, co-curricular, and athletic, to talk about how they're going to make pragmatic changes and become a little bit more global. And so every department now has, a global best practices on their goals and outcome sheet. So they're working toward that as well. So it's incremental, it's baby steps, but we're getting there. Yeah.
So first of all, thank you very much. This is fantastic, and it was a nice segue to my question. So, knowing that your goal is to embrace and understand opposing views other than yourself or your own or perspective, how has this helped shape maybe some of the practices or books or approaches to teaching that have been very personal to individuals who've been teaching for a number of years, or maybe personal in terms of what one thinks is best? And, maybe, I know that you're still collecting the data, but has it informed or encouraged being more insightful and reflective about what we're teaching, why we're teaching, and how we're teaching it?
Yeah, it has informed curriculum. And so one thing we did with the history department, we scrapped our entire sophomore curriculum, and now we're teaching a very rigorous world history course. And we thought to ourselves after we created this program that why we don't have world history anywhere in our 4 years here. And so we got rid of European history, brought it back as an AP for the seniors because it's a very good course. And then we did a lot of hard work to come up with a world history curriculum. That took about 2 years. What's been more difficult and also easy has been the English curriculum. We have a department, English department, that has been very experienced and also pretty green. And so the newer faculty that come in tend to be like, yeah, obviously, right? We're doing West African literature, we're doing women's lit, we're doing all this stuff. One thing that we did change, what I'm really happy with, is we always assign Huck Finn to freshmen, which is great, but we assign it the summer coming into the freshman year. And we said, no, you can't give that book to 13 and 14-year-olds without any context. Because it's a summer read book and they take a test on it and that's done. And so what we did was we said, you have to keep reading this book. It's a very important book. We're not going to censor the book because that's also very valuable. And we're going to bring it in after they've done some English training so they know how to analyze literature. And we're going to do a lot of triage work around talking about the cultural sensitivities about this book. And actually that conversation was really difficult for some of our faculty members because they've been doing it that way for a long time and they like the value of that. And given how we teach now and given some of the things that we know and the difficulties 13-year-olds have grappling with these really big topics, we couldn't do it that way anymore. And so we saw a lot of that with especially English and history, less so with the STEM fields. And also because I'm not in STEM, I don't really, they don't really know what they do, right? I mean, they could be approaching this from a very proactive angle and adopting a lot of it. But I haven't checked in recently with the STEM fields, like, so how global is your curriculum? Let's chat about this. I probably should. So again, it's incremental, but we're getting there. And it is informing what we do a little bit.
Is your student population diverse politically?
No.
No.
No, it's not. We do have affinity groups for students of different political backgrounds. In general, though, and I don't know if this is, at least in the Northeast independent schools, I think it's pretty common to have a large segment of the student population identify as more liberal than not. But we still have a pretty vocal and passionate group of conservative students. But it's a minority, it really is. We do have a lot of students who are like politics, I don't know. But we do find as they get older, they become a lot more aware of politics. They really do. And we want them to talk about that stuff, and they do a really good job of doing it, of talking about it. How about this? They're better at it than we think they are. They know how to talk about politics. They have language, they know some skills, and they know how to talk to each other in ways that are completely compassionate. And so we're learning a lot from them in this process in terms of what they're bringing to the table, and it's more than I had imagined they brought, in a good way. Yeah.
So you're probably intentional in not assigning a grade, I think I heard you say earlier?
I would like to. I really would.
Oh, you do want to
I would
assign
love to. I would love to make this a class that we can assess on. Not necessarily a firm grade, but I would love to, at the end of the unit, be able to write a comment about each student and say, you know, Susie has done a great job of becoming a little bit more comfortable engaging verbally with this type of content and these skills. And then even if it's not a pass grade, but like, yeah, I would like to give a grade. I think it would help some of our students who are completely disengaged with this. I'd say about a third of our students show up to class and sit there and pray that I never talk to them. And they just wait they look at the clock for 40 minutes and wait to leave. They tend to be white boys. And they just, regardless, even if I call them, they'll be like, no, sorry, I don't know the answer. It's like, there's no right answer, just give me something. I think it would add a little bit to the rigor of the course, but it would remain fundamentally changing the course. We would need to do a lot more in terms of small assessments, different types of questions we're asking them.
I wonder if it would change your dialogue a little bit.
It might. It might.
In not the intended way where you want more buy-in, but rather in a more formulaic way where you're participating because
the grades
you have
attached
these
to it.
parents.
And I wonder.
So
I wonder if it's a bad thing.
Yeah,
in terms of us teaching. We're teaching what I think to be really tangible skills here, in the same way that we're teaching research, writing, and reading skills in history, which is incredibly formulaic. But there's also the character element of it that takes into consideration individual dispositions and a whole lot of stuff, which makes formulaic approaches really tricky. So I don't know, it's a good thought. I don't think that we will be able to assess a grade anytime soon. That is not a battle I'm willing to fight right now with the school. And I think I get shut down pretty quickly. So, yeah. Yeah.
What is the role of the World Language Department in the Global Studies program?
So all of we teach French, Chinese, Spanish formally. In the classics, we teach Greek and Latin. And then I'm this weird rogue teacher who teaches German, just kind of like on the down low to a few students. So I do not consider myself a part of that department. They're legit. I'm just a dude who knows some German. But they've adopted this. I mean, in a lot of ways, this is already part of how they've approached teaching language and culture, right? It's global, it's essentially global. All of our departments travel abroad. Not necessarily every year, but at least every other year, we do have travel components to our trips. And we like it when our students who take those languages travel with the foreign language department. In terms of influencing pedagogy, I don't I have little to say to them about how this influences how they teach. A lot of their pedagogy by design is already global, and in fact probably more purposefully global than what I'm going to give them. And so when we did kind of a complete academic audit when we did the Global Studies program. We looked at each department and their best outcomes and their pedagogies. The World Language Department was, they were far and away already there. And so anytime we talk about this, they're like, we don't have to buy in, we're already there, we already bought it, right? And so they've been really good touchstones for me. They've been really good places where I can check in and say, do you think this is a good direction for us to go? Because they've been doing it for so long already. And we have had some turnover in our foreign language department, and it's only gotten better as newer faculty have come in. It's been really positive. But one thing that has been really great is that the places where our foreign language departments are traveling is changing. This year, Francis is going to Martinique for the first time. They'll be going to Senegal next year for the first time. It'll be our first trip as a school to West Africa, and I'm jazzed up about it. We do go to China every other year with the Chinese department. Our classics department's running a trip for the first time in a long time. And our Spanish department is hopefully, they go back and forth between Spain and, where else do they go? Costa Rica. And so they'll do that next year. So they're on board. They're leading this charge in a lot of ways.
So, no, you can go ahead, Sydney. So you mentioned that not a single white male faculty member has taken the course, and that generally the students that you find that are disengaged are overwhelmingly white boys, which I would venture to say probably doesn't surprise very many people. What have you found that works to bring those people into the fold, if anything?
I'm open to ideas. I really am. And again, perhaps I'm being too general here, but no, I'm not. I'm not being too general here. One of the things that we've done a lot of professional development work around race and gender and identity, and many of our faculty colleagues have become a little bit more aware of their presence in those conversations. And my hope is that as we do more of those professional development opportunities, I kind of just slip in there with this opportunity for faculty development and try to grab some of them as well. But the other thing I've done with some of our students is have one-on-one conversations with them about, perhaps you're not seeing the value of this, but I just want to sit down with you for just a second, Colin, and tell you, here's what we want you to get out of this. Because I think sometimes because they don't ever think about issues like this, they don't know what the value is in it. They don't know what the outcomes necessarily are. Someone like me, I know exactly what I need to get out of this, right? These are things that I think about constantly, right? So in many ways, I've self-selected to be doing this type of work. That's not the case for everybody. And so I need to be a little bit more aware of the fact that not everyone's coming into these courses with the same experiences, and then give a little bit more time to those students to really let them know, here's what we're doing. Before each course starts in the beginning of the third quarter, I do get the entire freshman class together, and I tell them, here's what we're doing. Here's exactly what we want to do, and it's also where I give the entry survey. So I do it there, but I think if I could do a little bit more triage work at an individual level, it might help, even with the faculty. So it's a great question, and again, open to ideas. Email me, please, and I'll take anything. Yes.
So I want to applaud you for the hard work and effort that you're doing to make this a reality for students. It was interesting because hearing you answer that question, the way you're saying, like, you had this like slip in, or hopefully you can kind of get in there.
Yeah.
And I think that's really interesting about diversity and inclusion in general in independent schools is that there are a lot of us who feel like we have to like find an avenue in. But then knowing that this is like the most critical conversation humanity can have, you know, is like finding ways pedagogically to really unwrap this large context of what you're looking at. And that's why I say I applaud you, because to get it to a place where it's pedagogical is poetic and beautiful, and it's hard work. And I'm wondering at your school, do you or do you not have a director, like, or a diversity director? How does that play out with what you're doing?
Yeah, we have a director of equity and inclusive communities. I believe that's his title. And he and I work very closely together. And a couple years back, we had a conference at one of our peer schools for directors of global studies and directors of equity and inclusion. And then we tried to figure out, so what's our Venn diagram look like? Right? And we overlap in a lot of ways, and that's awesome. Right? We can support one another. We can kind of like team up our budgets when we have big speakers that come and big things. But we find it to be supportive. All the work that we're doing is supportive of one another. And when something new comes up, one or two things happen. We either sit down and we say, okay, does this run in the face of the work that you're trying to do or I'm trying to do? Yes? Okay, then let's rethink it. No? Great, let's both go into it. So our director of equity and inclusive communities teaches and helped me create the dialogues across different scores. He was integral. He really was. And he teaches one section of that. He was on the committee to create the Global Studies program. So he and I work very closely together. When he brings speakers in, we work together to figure out the best way to do that. So he and I see him probably more than almost any other person on campus. And it's a good, not necessarily checks and balances, but it's a good way to reaffirm the work that we're both doing as being tied together. And also, if they're getting it, if the community's getting it once with him, they're going to get it again probably with me. Maybe under a different name, but it's similar values and similar skill sets. Yeah. But I think a good relationship between those two positions, and they are different. There are many unique things that we do, but we do overlap a lot. But if they're not supportive of one another, it won't work.
As someone from Boston, are you concerned that New Orleans scheduled the start of your dinner, the start of the Boston Red Sox opening game in the World Series?
So I did.
The Dodgers game?
No, I don't even know who we're playing. But I was hoping that wherever we go to dinner, might have a TV or two. That but baseball games are long, right? So
They're long.
might be able to get half of it.
The season's long, that's for sure.
Do you have anyone else? Well, Rob, I want to thank you so much for not only what you're doing, but for who you are. Well, it is. It's about humanity. And it's about understanding all people have value. And the heart that you put into this and you shared with us all here is important to us. And I hope you feel that we're on the same side.
Absolutely.
We want to make the world a better place. So thank you very much. Promise to read the Dignity book.
Especially chapter 5, right?
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. I'm sure
Thank you so
some
much.
questions. Thank you.